A very good morning and welcome to Media Monitor, the show that brings you gripping discussions on all the stories that hog the headlines this past week. We're live here on the SABC News channel. I'm your host, Alicia Jali. Good morning and thank you so much for choosing us. Here's what we will be unpacking for you in the next hour. We start by asking, what impact will the Business Leadership South Africa's suspension of Eskom and Transnet actually have on the country's economy? We also look into the nationwide COSATU protest against corruption and state capture. And we ask, lastly, why is Zimbabwe's economic crisis worsening? But of course, before we delve deeper into all these topics, let's first have a look at the news that are currently making headlines across the country. NC National Executive Committee member Lindiwe Zulu has described as tragic and unfortunate the event of yesterday's NC Provincial Elective Conference in the Eastern Cape, where some delegates and PC members staged a walkout after a scuffle broke out between the two rival factions. NC National spokesperson Zizi Kodwa has condemned the violence that erupted at the conference that saw 28 people injured. The conference's credentials were eventually adopted following lengthy delays, and voting has started for the top 5 positions at the PEC, currently underway. And results will be announced at around 10 o'clock this morning, and NC Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa is expected to address the conference after the announcement of the results. Police Minister Fikile Mbalula has announced that he will send a task team to the Cape Flats to investigate the shooting of 11 people out at the Marikana area in Philippi East on Friday night. The shooting followed an earlier incident in the area on Tuesday in which 7 people were killed in what was believed to be vigilante murders. Western Cape Police are treating the murders as a priority crime. Police Minister Fikile Mbalula promised no stone will be left unturned in dealing with the murders. And in your sporting action, New Zealand have beaten Argentina 36-10 out in Buenos Aires in the Rugby Championship and are short of retaining the title. The All Blacks were awesome at times as they built a 29-3 lead on 28 minutes. However, the champions became ragged after half-time, and the much-improved Pumas kept them scoreless until new cap David Havili scored a last-gasp try. South Africa will now host the All Blacks in Cape Town next Saturday after that humiliation of 57-0 2 weeks ago. Early yesterday, the Boks managed a 27-0 draw against Australia. Let's look at your news now. ANC National spokesperson Zizi Kodwa has condemned the violence that erupted at the second day of the party's 8th Eastern Cape Provincial Conference that saw 28 people being injured. Now, this as outgoing Provincial Secretary Oscar Mabuyane and outgoing Chairperson Phumulo Masualle both contested each other for the chairperson position. Well, it's alleged that the clashes started when the factions clashed during the discussions of the credentials. This then led to the delegates beating each other up with chairs and other objects. Voting has meanwhile started for the top 5 positions, and results will be announced at 10 o'clock this morning. And of course, as we've already indicated, that ANC Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa is then expected to address the conference after the announcement of those results. Police Minister Fikile Mbalula has announced that he will send a task team to the Cape Flats to investigate the shooting of 11 people at the Marikana informal settlement in Philippi East on Friday night. Friday night's shootings followed an earlier incident in the area on Tuesday in which 7 people were killed in what was believed to be vigilante murders.
Marikana, an informal settlement that has become a place of horror. When the dust had settled, 4 bodies lay sprawled here. Distraught family members returned to the grisly scene.
I was on my way from work. I just tried to call my brother. I was need a memory card on my phone. I just hear the gun shooting here. Then I just closed the door.
A mother's deep anguish. Her son was one of the victims.
When I 25 years.
The community wants swift and crack policing, Violent crime haunts the area.
We would like the Office of Minister, Fikile Mbalula, to come down here so that they can hear from us the grievances that we have as a community at large.
We've got a lot of illegal firearms out there. And the other problem is the shooting. Most of the shooting are happening in our shacks. We've got a lot of shacks in the area, which is there's no roads where the police vehicle can ride.
The police minister promised no stone would be left unturned.
We have unleashed the law enforcement agencies and reinforcement to Cape Town because we cannot allow vigilantism and break of lawlessness in that part of the province. Our police are not only on alert, they are on the ground to chase the perpetrators, because that degeneration, it is something that has been going on there for some time.
Police say 7 other people were also killed in the area earlier this week. 3 others are still in hospital. Mariska Botha, SABC News, Philippi East.
Prolific writer and journalist Ken Themba's life was celebrated in Johannesburg yesterday, and a tombstone was unveiled to honor the literary legend. Themba died in exile in Swaziland back in 1968.
Among us walked giants, literary titans like Ken Themba, the wordsmith and erudite author honored.
They are not just events, they are about certain people who left their mark. They are about a legacy. A person like Ken Themba, when people say he was a literary giant, it's not a cliche.
Themba's life was consumed by writing and teaching. His words indelibly etched in ink. His children celebrated his complex life.
This is deeply humbling for the family to have this honor bestowed on him and of course my mom, Anna. And we are so grateful to the Ministry of Arts and Culture for honoring Papa Ken in this way.
When I read his writings, he wrote with such exquisite language. And for me, it was the biggest inspiration ever.
Themba began as an investigative journalist for the famous Drum magazine. He went on to win the Order of Ikhamanga in silver for excellent achievement in literature. Some of his peers shared their fondest memories.
You'd always have something to say which will be witty. Ken would throw you a party, your birthday party. My birthday falls on the 20th of August. 16th of August is looking for me in that little town of Manzini. But the Swazi lady says to me.
His best work to date is the short story, The Suit. Other notable gems include The World of Ken Themba and The Will to Die. And die he did, aged just 44. Along with others like Ned Nakasa, he lived by the credo, live fast, die young, and have a good-looking corpse. Lapang Alamu, SABC News, Johannesburg.
UDM leader Bantu Olomisa says coalition politics are going to be critical come the 2019 polls. Olomisa was speaking at the party's 20th anniversary out in Midrand yesterday, and he urged other political parties to take coalition politics seriously in order to benefit ordinary people.
Celebrating 20 years of existence, the UDM is the first political party to break away from the ANC after South Africa became a democratic state. While other breakaway parties struggle to survive, the UDM believes it's on the right path. Party leader Bantu Olomisa says he made the right choice by leaving the ANC. The UDM was established by Bantu Olomisa, Rolf Meyer and John Taylor in 1997. Olomisa says the UDM has proven to be both resilient and principled against all political turbulence.
We have had to wait patiently for this moment, but we are ready and waiting and poised to serve our people as a member of a national coalition government. That is what lies on the horizon. At that point, the sun will rise on South Africa and a new dawn will break When this happens, the country's democracy will really come of age.
20 years on, the party finds itself playing a crucial role in the political landscape of the country. Now Holomisa says coalition politics are now more relevant in the country. This despite the coalition at the Nelson Mandela Bay being on the verge of collapse. He believes that the differences will be resolved.
Coalition government is not easy. Inevitably, when different parties with different histories, different value systems, and different worldviews make the commitment to work together, it requires patience, tolerance, a willingness to forgive a mistake of judgment, and sometimes pardon those who have made those mistakes, or unwise language and decisions.
UDM leader also criticized his former party, saying corruption and failure of the governing party on service delivery will cost them come 2019. Ntlantla Khatlane, SABC News, Johannesburg.
All right, it's exactly 9:11 and that ends your news bulletin. Let's take a quick break, and after that, we take a look at what stories have been trending on social media with Babalo Lepaka. A very good morning to you, Babalo.
Good morning, Alicia. How are you?
Good, thank you. Welcome back. I'm sure you've been wondering who our guests are this morning. We're very pleased to welcome media analysts on the main set, Mr. Shani Makari, and of course, Mr. Tebogo Detsejo. And of course, gentlemen, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning.
All right. And I'd already introduced you, Babala. Good morning. This is SABC Digital News producer Babala Lepaka, who has all the trending topics for us this morning. Let's start with the biggest one. What was it, Babala?
It was probably the COSATU march against corruption and state capture.
How did it do?
It was probably one of the biggest stories of this week because it caught a lot of interest on social media to a point where we decided to run a poll on SABC News Online where we were asking our participants whether they think that the COSATU strike will have any impact on the issues such as state capture and corruption. We had some very interesting responses coming through. 16% saying yes. The majority, 66%, saying no, it's not going to tackle any of these issues. And then we have the remaining 18% saying, yeah, maybe.
Do you have any tweets on this topic?
We do have tweets.
I want to hear the views that people were sharing, Babala, in comparison with the last march that was in the same interest that was held by Save South Africa. What is Simon Bays saying there?
Simon Bays, he was basically just retweeting pictures that were put up by Griselda Lewis.
I see.
And then we have a tweet coming through from Tebogo Barnes.
What is Tebogo Barnes?
Tebogo Barnes was basically saying that the hashtag COSATU strike wasn't influential enough. They were just focusing on Ramaphosa and they branded it as a strike against corruption. I'm confused.
Moshe Mokoena says, of course, it wasn't influential enough. They were just focusing on Ramaphosa and they branded it as a strike against corruption. Confused? Everybody seems confused by this march.
confused.
What was the march
What was
really
the march about?
What is Ngibize Kwani Mwakina saying there, Babale? Can you see that?
The main reason for the poor turnout in the hashtag COSATU march was because they didn't have a relevant agenda and motive, rather it looked paid.
Ah, you see, now that sounds like a proper... Guys, what are your assertions with this, of course, the deliberations and the reaction on social media pertaining to this march? I mean, let's start by the poll. 68% saying no, it's not going to make a difference. So it was just a waste of time. Deboho, let's start with you.
Yeah, well, it wasn't that impactful. There wasn't much participation in the strike. And
Why do you think that was?
The strategy around their strike wasn't that striking. I think a lot of people expected a little bit more from COSATU, perhaps a national shutdown, of which perhaps they even failed to shut down one street in Braamfontein. So I think that they need to look at planning strikes to become more relevant and perhaps have guests, you know, from who are politically influential to come and add, you know, to the fire of the strike.
Shoni, do you think it didn't
Well, to me,
strike?
it's very clear that COSATU is a shadow of its former self, and they've got themselves to blame for a lot of that. The other thing is, let's remember that the likes of NUMSA have left COSATU, and obviously that's a huge chunk of their base.
Yeah.
And also the newly formed a federation led by Zweli Zimbabwe. So those are really influential factors in a way that has contributed to the state that COSATU finds itself in today.
Wow, very interesting reviews. I wonder if COSATU knew that when they were planning this march. Let's move on to the next big hashtag. Did it have a striking balance?
So in the next big hashtag, we had Thandima Gqubela, who was acquitted of murder.
18-year jail term overturned at the Supreme Court of Appeal.
So that was overturned at the Supreme Court of Appeal, yes. So the SCA said that it held medical evidence from pathologists that the judge probably just died of natural causes. Right? So, like I said, also this also caught a lot of interest on social media.
What are people saying?
And people are basically questioning South Africa's legal system.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Let's look at some of the tweets that came through on Thandima Gqubela.
So this is just a meme.
She'll be smoking a cigar away after those news.
As Manxhosa people would say, this is how Thandima Gqubela came out of court today. Confident.
Confident. Sandile Wele says, of course, so the state wrongfully charged Gqubela. Now going to compensate her. Wow, our justice system, those sad faces.
I found this as a very interesting comment. Please tell me that there's at least something Thandima Gqubela has been found guilty of, even if it's just one.
Yes, there was that whole thing about the falsifying of the signature on the will. Mlibogazi says Thandima Gqubela has restored my faith in marriage. I don't know how that makes the bulk of any argument. What is Siko saying there? Let's take more tweets, Babana.
My understanding is that if Thandima Gqubela was guilty, she would be serving an 18-year sentence behind bars. No?
Yes. Well, she was serving that, and then she was seeking an appeal. Let's look at the last but not least. Nsika Msutu says, like, how though? Thandima Gqubela uqashe njani? Like, really? Shoni, let's hear your reviews about this matter. I mean, should we be looking at the erroneous procedures at our judiciary, or should we be saying, well, our legal system is just messed up?
Actually, what it does say, to me, it does confirm that our judicial system actually works. Remember, we have different layers of it. So you have a magistrate level, you have higher courts, you have Supreme Court of Appeal and the Constitutional Court. And that is to make sure that if a mistake has been made along the way, somebody else, will be able to correct that at a higher level. Because remember, she was convicted based on circumstantial evidence, and maybe a higher court or a court of appeal did not find that to be sufficient to send somebody away for 18 years. And to me, that is a victory of our judicial system. Rather than the opposite.
I'm not happy about that, though, Deboho, because then what does it say about the primary phase of judiciary? Are we saying that we have to go to all these the other courts in order to verify whether you're guilty or not? Because people are not just going to say now, if you're proven guilty in a normal court, it's going to take the appeals court to overturn your judgment.
I think this reaffirms the fact that you're innocent until you're proven guilty.
Yeah.
A lot of us, as soon as somebody is accused of something, even if it's a huge crime,
we pick a side.
We pick a side.
Yeah, we judge them.
And once they're acquitted, we continue calling them whatever it is, murderer or fraudster, even though they've been acquitted. So I think this should teach us, to rather not judge somebody based on the first accusation that is made, but judge it after the evidence has been tested.
Very interesting, Tebogo. Very interesting. So even if it is a guilty thing, even if they're not guilty, we must wait for the prosecutors to appeal, because chances are they could still be guilty.
Well, they might still be guilty at that point, but they shouldn't be guilty before.
But shouldn't we just say that judiciary's responsibility is to find the proper evidence to convict people right from the start? I mean, why should we be going through 5 different courts to get one judgment?
Well, sometimes there are certain cases that fall through the cracks. You might not have a good attorney. There might be evidence that is under dispute, and therefore only the High Court would have been able or to be in a position to scrutinize that.
Yeah, you put it nice like that. No more argument from me. Thank you, Tebogo. Let's wrap it up very quickly, Babala.
Okay, and then we had the passing of the Playboy founder, the original king of all blessers.
The
Hugh
founding
Hefner.
blesser.
Yes. So he died on Wednesday at his home in Los Angeles. He was 91 years old. And then we had a range of very, very, very interesting comments coming through from people on social media.
There's
people
his
saying
signature red jacket.
Yeah, I mean, he lived his life. People saying that a lot of people wanted to live like him, although they criticize him all the time.
Yes.
And then in terms of the comments that are coming through, we have a tweet from All Cash Homie saying, the world's biggest Playboy passes away. The bunny in heaven will be delighted to welcome him. Hugh Hefner, R.I.P.
Oh, Eric Benkala says, did anyone live a better life than Hugh Hefner? I'm pretty sure the answer is no.
And then, Alicia, we had some other very interesting comments coming through from people saying that, well, in as much as he was like this, Hugh Hefner, he was the original blesser.
Yeah.
Other people are saying, well, he did objectify women. Like these comments coming through here, it says, I've been reading praises of Hugh Hefner as a civil rights campaigner. I'll reserve my praise for activists who did not objectify women.
Very interesting observation there. What do you think about that, Shani?
Well, from what I've observed also, in the traditional media, the opinion is definitely divided, because there are people who are calling him a misogynist, precisely objectifying women, and there are those who are saying, he was at the forefront of a sexual revolution. So one really doesn't know what to make of the guy.
He called himself a sexual revolutionist. Tebogo, a quick one from you.
All I'll say is perhaps society needs new role models.
All right, that's where we leave it. Babala, do give our viewers a URL where they can get all these stories and more.
So you can get all the stories from www.sabc.co.za/news.
All right, well, coming up after the break, we ask what the implications of business leadership, South Africa's decision to kick Eskom and Transnet out of their alleged involvement in corruption and state capture. Find out more when Media Monitor returns. Well, a very good morning and welcome to AM News live at 10:00 hours across all Central Africa regions.
A fitting send-off for a revolutionary giant, a life dedicated in service of the people.
The result means that the Swallows are out of the ABC Municipal League and drop to the amateur fourth tier of South African football, the SAB League.
Tune in on AM News every Saturday and Sunday from 10 hours.
And we're back with Media Monitor. Business Leadership South Africa on Thursday booted out state-owned entities Eskom and Transnet for their involvement in corruption and state capture. With immediate effect, the leadership organization also suspended the membership of audit firm KPMG last week, of course pending an outcome of an investigation into the company's involvement in state capture. Meanwhile, former Trillian CEO Bianca Goodson made explosive allegations about the events surrounding the partnership between McKinsey, Trillian and state-owned Eskom and others.
Business Leadership South Africa announced that it is suspending Eskom and Transnet's membership with immediate effect. BLSA CEO Bonang Mohale says the numerous allegations of corruption and corporate governance failures both Eskom and Transnet are disturbing. However, Transnet has rejected a statement by BLSA that it has suspended the state-owned rail company's membership as misleading. Transnet insists it had decided not to renew its membership with the business lobby group in a bid to cut costs. BLSA is, however, adamant that it suspended the membership of both Transnet and Eskom over allegations of state capture. BLSA says this followed talks with the two state-owned enterprises regarding alleged corrupt behavior over a long period. SA has also repeated its call for government to set up the judicial investigation into state capture as recommended by former public protector Thuli Madonsela.
Talk about the impact of these two giants being booted out of one of the most reputable bodies in the country. Shani, let's start with you.
Well, a number of things come to mind. One, it's clearly a sign of desperation in that, you know what, the institutions that were supposed to do something about state capture are not doing anything. Because, yes, there will be an impact. There will be ripple effects. Because once you're not part of that body, think of, the Bell Pottinger situation.
Yeah.
You know, they were kicked out of an association, essentially, and that had ripple effects in terms of clients walking away.
Yeah.
Now, we don't have a choice. We don't walk away from Eskom, unfortunately. However, there are people who lend money to the likes of Eskom and Transnet, and for lack of any other action, they will look upon what the action taken by Business Leadership South Africa to say, actually, maybe we shouldn't be lending money to you. Maybe we should be distancing ourselves as well. But then again, that has ripple effect in terms of the ordinary person on the street. Because if money is no longer available and those who are willing to lend it are only willing to lend it at very high rates, you know, it will start to impact the average person on the street, you and me, in terms of our buying. Already, Eskom is asking for like 19% increase for the next period, and that is ridiculous. Inflation is under 6%. Where do you get the 19% from? And who's prepared to give 19%, pay that 19%, knowing where the money is going? You know, quite frankly.
Well, so what does this mean for every man on the street then, Teboho? Should they be worried about what Shani has just said?
I agree with Shani. He's actually spot on. This is a very bold move by Business Leadership South Africa. I think the viewers need to know that Business Leadership South Africa has membership, which owns a good percentage of our economy. And the relationship between state-owned enterprises and business is very important because none operate in a silo. And as Shoni has just mentioned, that our state-owned enterprises rely to a large extent on asset management firms who capitalize a lot of these SOEs and allow us to operate them. And as you've seen recently, Transnet just won a tender to recapitalize the National Railway Agency in Zimbabwe, and that was 5.6 billion rands. And so the investment is actually good. We're seeing good results from the investment from our state-owned enterprises. However, there can be better that is done. I think the finances can be managed better. They can impact on our economy much better, especially if they can root out corruption. And I think that is what BLSA is trying to do. They are saying that, you know, we're putting our foot down, regardless of the membership fees that you're paying, regardless of your impact on our economy, we're saying no to state capture. And I think South Africa is in a very fortunate place right now. I don't think we've realized it, that there are other countries that are so deep in state capture that it's going to take so many years for them to get out of it, because those people are holding the economy. By its roots. And so it's important for us to see that this is actually a momentous occasion for us. It's a great opportunity for us to really root it out. But I think moving forward, we need to be a bit more rigorous and fair in how we analyze this. Because we talk about state capture, yet we do not take the Democratic Alliance to task for what they've done in trying to stop us from knowing who is funding political parties. They were the only political party which rejected and opposed the move by civil society in order for the political parties, with the Department of Justice, to reveal who is funding them. Because that is where state capture begins. And to root it out, we must know who is funding these political parties.
But guys, let's talk about business leadership in an essence. I mean, it seems like it holds the key to basically root out the corruption in the country. Should just suspending members be the way to send a very strong message that they're not going to deal with this type of modus operandi, Shani?
The unfortunate thing is that obviously membership is voluntary so that you're able to lobby government and other stakeholders as a unified force.
Yeah.
So there's not much else they could do other than to say, you're no longer part of us. But that in itself, in my view, sends a very strong message to the other stakeholders that will have to deal with those institutions. I wish they had more teeth. I wish there was a lot more they could do.
Maybe compliance of some sort, regulation of some sort.
Absolutely, but unfortunately, the people who do have the real muscle aren't doing anything.
That's true.
Where is the NPA? They said, no, we're busy investigating and we'll come back and by then I'll probably have grandchildren by the time this thing is actually brought to court. And that's a very unfortunate. But I think they're doing they've taken an important step in terms of indicating that they're also not prepared to do this. But maybe what they could do is revise the terms of membership to say, okay, these are some of the sanctions that we could then impose if one is found to behave in a manner that is seriously unbecoming of a good corporate citizen.
Absolutely. I mean, we're just talking about Transnet now. Deboch, I failed to ask you this. I mean, it has rejected the statement that their membership was, of course, withdrawn. They say, no, they didn't renew their membership as a cost-cutting measure. Do you think this is true? Or do they just have egg on their face? They don't know what to do or say at this stage.
Donald Trump invited an NBA team to the White House, and they rejected it, and he said, no, I'm taking away my invitation. So it's the same thing. No, you're not dumping me, I'm dumping you. It's very childish. I think, BLSA has suspended them. They were probably going to renew their membership, and unfortunately that's not going to happen. And so if you look at it, I actually think that BLSA does have teeth. For the fact that a lot of our organizations, be it in the private or the public sector, have a high reliance on confidence.
That's true.
Your reputation is very important in terms of you getting financing, in terms of you getting deals. I mean, if Transnet had a bad reputation, they were not going to get that deal in Zimbabwe.
In Zimbabwe,
And there are many other deals across the world that they could work on. And so this is going to have a significant impact, on the two state-owned enterprises. And I think it's very important now for something to be done. I mean, government needs to step in and take decisive action.
But I mean, speaking of government stepping in and taking decisive action, the court, the High Court on Friday, of course, ruled against the DA on having the president institute an inquiry into state capture as of right now. How do you think this, puts away or gets in the way of the fight against corruption then, Shoni?
Well, one of the Sunday papers is leading with a story this morning that the Treasury is captured. Because high-ranking senior officials within the Treasury are saying that, there's a parallel administration that has been created by the minister. So how do we expect the government to actually solve a problem when we are told that government is actually the problem? So we really, and I accept what Deboch is saying in that, we are at a point where we can turn around from this and become worse than, to the point where other countries are at this point in time. But we have to take decisive action. It might require a new government. It might require, perhaps the coalition governments that are happening at a regional level. Maybe that's the way to solve that problem. Because right now, the idea, in my view, of writing a blank check to any politician is probably very perilous. And we've observed that over the years. I think the ruling party became too comfortable and actually thought that they deserve it. or they're entitled to rule. And I think it's time that South Africans actually show them that, no, you're not entitled to rule. We're giving you a mandate to do something for us, not for yourselves.
And speaking of mandates, who then should we maybe give as a person, a medium, who's going to say, all right, we're looking in from outside, this is what's currently going on in terms of state capture, so that we know that none of our SOEs or those departments actually have a say in whatever the outcome of those investigations are. Who do you think we should give the investigation solely to look into state capture to?
Well, I first think that we need to look into how we view state capture in itself.
Do we understand
what state capture is? Because the state was captured before the ANC took power.
We hear that.
And the idea was for it to be recaptured and redistributed effectively to the people. The people are the ones who are supposed to capture the state. It's our state. It's by the people of the people. And so I think from my perspective, if we're looking at who needs to review this, it's obviously someone who's going to be independent.
Yeah.
And perhaps if you look at what the public protector has said, she gave an idea of what could happen. I don't think she has the mandate to do that, and perhaps she could have given it to the speaker if the president was conflicted. But I think the court is going to decide in terms of who's going to look into that.
It's going to be a very interesting one. I know, Shawnee, we have to take a quick break. When Media Monitor returns, we look at COSATU's massive strike. It's coming up after this break.
The Law Society has slammed notices sent to 4 universities to jack up standards or risk losing their LLB courses. The Council on Higher Education issued a stern warning to the universities to conform within 6 months.
I think it will affect the university. I think outside the law faculty, there's a funding issue.
It's been 112 years since Enoch Sontonga died as a relatively unknown composer, choir master and teacher. But today his legacy lives on through his greatest composition, Nkosi Sikeleli Afrika.
For all your news updates, stay tuned to Your World from Monday to Sunday.
And here it is, thousands of Congress of South African Trade Union members marched across the country this past week under the banner Corruption and State Capture. The main march started at COSATU House out in Braamfontein here in Johannesburg, from which workers marched to banks and government offices. South African Communist Party General Secretary Blaine Nzimande challenged the workers to hold leaders to account, but reiterated that anti-state capture marches are not against the African National Congress and government, but rather against what's wrong in the movement and state. Let's find out more in this clip.
Protesting corruption and state capture. The two alliance partners says mass action was not against the ANC, but instead a call to the ruling party to deal with issues that threaten the stability of the country. The Union Federation says looting of state resources is hampering service delivery.
Good December is coming. We must play our role as workers. We must play our role as good members to make sure that the choice of workers prevails.
And since relations within the alliance are shaky, a call for an urgent meeting was made.
Which is why we are saying it will help both COSATU, the ANC, SABC and SANCO as the alliance leadership to get together and discuss these issues so that we see our way forward. At the moment, standoffs are not going to help anybody. We've got to get together under the roof and solve the problems that are confronting us.
The Labour Federation also reiterated its call to government for a total ban of labour brokers. I am Mhlongo, SABC News, Durban.
All right, well, we spoke a bit about the march, but I want to hear your impression on Blaine Zimande using the march to ask why state institutions had not immediately acted against corruption allegations, of course, involving the Gupta family. Debo.
Yeah, I think this particular march was a bit confusing because it seemed as if the alliance partners had a different understanding
of what the march was about.
Of what the march was all about. And when you start to do mass action, you need one, very clear purpose of why it is that you are protesting, so that the audience doesn't get confused. When 1 minute you're singing a song in support of one candidate, and then the next minute you're talking about collective people taking responsibility, and then someone else says, no, it's one family. So there is confusion. And in order for your protest to be concise and impactful, you need to be very clear on what it is that is your agenda. You'll also find that within the alliance partners, there are divisions. Not everybody is on the same slate or paradigm. They don't have the same understanding of the problems that we're faced and the challenges that need to be tackled. And so you will always find a situation where if it is being addressed by 10 people and people are going in different directions, you can't expect that to be impactful.
Shani?
Well, I'll start by saying that, I'm going to leave my number here because they clearly need a reputation management expert. First of all, you don't go out to the public with messaging from, state capture right down to labor broking, and you expect people not to be confused about what it is that you're trying to achieve. But I understand the confusion because, they're reluctant to say what they're supposed to say. They're reluctant to go up there and clearly put the case on the ANC and say, you know what, you guys have gone onto the wrong path and you're not taking the necessary action you need to take to correct, and bring this movement back to its former glory days. And they can't do that. And yet they want to go up there and try and show the public that actually they're concerned. Well, it's one thing to be concerned. We're all concerned. But you know what? You're sitting at a position where you are at the grown-ups table with the ANC, the SACP, and your ruling party alliance, where you can actually point it out to them. If they're not listening, well, what's holding you there? Why can't you walk away? Many analysts have said so during the week that, what? You do have an option. You can walk away because every year or every time when we head towards elections, COSATU and the SACP will be the ones complaining that, we are being used to get the ANC into power. Once that happens, we no longer matter. So, what is it? Is it a battered spouse syndrome? You keep going back to the same person who abuses you all the time and you want sympathy from us? I'm sorry. I don't get it.
With that in mind, Herman Mashaba also wrote an open letter to the COSATU leadership and the organizers of the march. And he stated clearly what you've just said here, Shani. He says that the way that COSATU has positioned itself to our nation as the saviors from the clutches of state capture and corruption is fatally flawed. What do you think about that, Debo?
Look,
do you think he has a point?
I think the issue here is credibility. And to my colleagues speaking about reputation management, they need to consult on. Because if you look at it, if you are, as COSATU, you are trying to gain membership and you're trying to gain credibility, you cannot do it if you go one way and you act the opposite way. Now, COSATU and the SACP gave us the current leadership. And so you have very little credibility when you now speak out against the same leadership that you gave us. And that is why you will see at the protest, people are saying, hi, Soga.
Because you're not happy with the person, now we must all be mad.
So another thing is, a lot of these leaders are in a position to take much more decisive action. Some of them can resign and say, I do not want to be a part of this. I'm not going to associate myself with this. Until something is done, I'm not going to take up that position. And so why are they not resigning? Why are they keeping their positions and then trying to have some sort of a double consciousness whereby they also now stand against the leadership, but they're working with the leadership at the same time?
This is always the question that I want to ask, Shani, because a lot of people want to come and paint other people as being, this and that, when in fact they themselves are still doing the very same thing that they're going out in public and claiming not to do. But how do we get to the bottom repercussion of that then?
Well, first of all, we have, to Tebogo's point about, lack of credibility. You can't do one thing and then preach the other and expect us to believe what you're saying.
Yeah.
So there is that issue. But also, you've got Gucci communists. Who walk around holding the banner of communism, which, as we understand it crudely, is about, equitably sharing the resources available. And yet you're quite happy with a 1.7 million BMW being chauffeured around town, when the likes of Gordon used to drive around a much, cheaper. But let me go back to another issue of how do we solve our problem, because it's at a national level. And my view is that there are a lot of things that we need to review in terms of our checks and balances as a country. Look at, for instance, the issue of the president and the powers that he had. That's way too much. We created a position for Nelson Mandela, and we forgot that one day he will no longer be there. And quite frankly, that's time we need. He appoints what? The premiers. He appoints the Chapter 9 institution heads. He appoints all those people. So if there's something he doesn't want to see happen, he just sits back on it. We have the board of the SABC that should have been approved by now, but he's still sitting on it. He's studying it. I thought Parliament did that for him.
He's applying his mind.
He's applying his mind. I thought, but Parliament is supposed to do, and they've done that already. To me, it clearly says that there's something that he doesn't like. But be that as it may, I think we need to revise our checks and balances so that no one person can wreck the state. And I think if we get to that position, we are in a better chance of getting to the position that Tebogo was referring to earlier.
Tebogo, let's expand on that. Then where should the media come in trying to, uncover those skeletons that the people that are, marching behind those, we are good banners? I mean, how far should media go in trying to suss out where this corruption actually begins and who's part of it and expose and name and shame everybody? Come on. What are you scared of?
It's basic research.
Absolutely.
You get really tired on social media. In as much as state capture needs to be rooted out, it's unacceptable. It needs to be rooted out. However, we get tired when there's only a one-sided approach to state capture.
Yeah.
And it's also quite exhausting when you see a lot of people who supported these candidates now put them in power, removed some of the candidates that were doing a good job, put other candidates in power. Now they don't want them because they're not doing well. Or they had a fallout, now they don't want them. And all of a sudden they're heroes. I mean, what is heroic about putting in leadership and later saying, oh Lord, they must go to jail? So the question is, the media needs to be much more critical of how they analyze people. Stop putting people on a pedestal who don't deserve it.
Absolutely.
So that, I mean, that's how I see it.
Thank you, Tebogo. What do you think we should do as media?
I mean,
whatever happened to investigative journalism,
That is the thing. Most of our so-called breaking stories are merely things that have been served on a platter to journalists. There's yes, you still have to analyze and do your checks and balances to make sure that your story checks out.
Yeah.
But I wish we had more of the likes of the Amabungane and so on. I'm not saying they're perfect. I'm just saying as an investigative unit dedicated to that, in-depth investigation. But again, the financial models of media institutions is actually it doesn't. And to me, that is the problem, because if you're going to write a huge investigative piece on a Sunday paper, where are you going to get the advertising to carry that page? So there is something that needs to be done. I mean, big corporates. I've always asserted that actually need to come in and actually find a way of funding media. In fact, I was very happy to hear that the JSE decided that, they're going to continue to require that JSE-listed companies advertise their results on newspapers because that keeps them afloat.
Absolutely,
but back to the point, I think it's the financing that obviously is hampering our media's ability to do proper investigations.
I'm very sad to hear that it's only money that's hindering us from getting to the truth. Well, after the break, we look at Zimbabwe's cashless economy. It's all coming up after this. Welcome back. Zimbabwean President Robert Mugabe on Thursday remained very adamant that he would remain in office despite the worsening cash and fuel shortages that have hit the southern African country over the past years. Mugabe said the artificial shortages were being created by social media and unnamed senior officials of his government who were hell-bent on removing him from office. The 93-year-old leader vowed that he would continue as the president. I mean, is he delusional? What is he talking about here, Shoni?
Well, you know, the one thing that
created by social media. The crisis in Zimbabwe is created by social media and unnamed officials within the government.
Why is it that we have...
Have you been to Zimbabwe?
4 million Zimbabweans are living in this country, you know, precisely because they've left that country because of poor, you know, economic prospects for them. And over and above that, you know, Mugabe is given this impression that actually politicians don't do much, especially presidents, because otherwise somebody who can properly concentrate on his soup is supposed to be running a country. You know, if you're 93, honestly, how many times do you take naps? Just, you know... So if you're required to run a country that is in trouble, that actually needs energy, needs somebody to actually do something. In fact, around the world, many countries seem to be going the opposite. They're getting more and more younger people who have more energy, newer ideas, fresh ideas to actually develop their countries. No, we have a 93-year-old hanging on to power, and it's everybody. It's never me. It's the one man who done it. That's his. That seems to be his modus operandi. You know, lately he's been even accusing Nelson Mandela of selling out. I know other people in this country have done the same, but, you know, he's in no position to accuse Nelson of anything.
We have him for binational talks, binational relation talks coming in the country very soon. But, Debo, I want to find out from you, and I've asked this question before, why isn't Africa, the continent, the AU body, intervening in matters of Zimbabwe?
Well, maybe because the AU is not funded by African countries. It's mostly funded by international donors. And that's why it doesn't serve the purpose of Africans.
There is that point.
For how long have we been talking about economic integration of Africa? Because that is the only way we're going to deal with sanctions. That is the only way we're going to grow our economy and make the most of our natural resources, including our people. If you look at Africa, it's one of the least densely populated continents in the world. Even though the growth of the population is going to be quite meteoric over the next 10 years. We need to move towards a situation where we now see one African currency. So that because when there's a dip in the currency and inflation, hyperinflation in Zimbabwe, it affects South Africa. And so if you have one currency across the continent, it's going to be much more economically stable. How long have we been talking about having one passport, you know, for the entire Africa, removing the visa system?
When Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma was still the AU head.
We spoke about one passport. And why is it so difficult for us to move across the continent? Why do you need a visa to go to Botswana or to go to Rwanda?
Intracontinental business trade.
Actually, you don't need a visa to go to Rwanda. And that is why it was recently voted as the second most competitive economy in Africa.
Yeah.
And so we need to move towards what Rwanda is doing, where you really serve the people. But I think liberation politics have made it very difficult for us to move forward and elect, you know, the correct leaders.
All right. And while we're dealing with state capture, it's another crisis in Zimbabwe. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Mr. Tebogo Detseho and, of course, Mr. Shoni Makari, bringing you sound analysis of some of the biggest news of this week. It is, of course, just a couple of minutes before the top of the hour. And, you know, I'm back with more news on top of that. Stay with us.